Okay. Well, thank you to everyone that's joining. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and go ahead and give you a little bit of information on what this meetup group's about and some of the things that we're going to do and some feedback, hopefully, from you guys on ideas on topics that are relevant and interesting to you. So just give me a second here. Yeah, so hopefully you can see my screen. When I'm in this mode, I really don't see you guys. But can you see me, William? Can you see my screen?
Yeah, it's coming through on my end.
Okay, just making sure, because when I pop over here, I just don't see you guys. So just let me know if something's not moving that I'm talking about or anything like that. Just let me know, and I'll pop back over into the meeting tab and take a look at it. I think I just heard that, so that wasn't someone coming in. And if you don't mind, William, before you pop off the call, if you could grab anybody that's trying to come in if I don't see it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool, appreciate it, man. Yeah, so welcome, and thank you for attending the first meetup session for Ansible for Networking. So this is an online meetup group. In the past, I've hosted a few different ones when I used to work for Cisco, and I'd have them on site at RTP. And then COVID came along, and all the in-person stuff went away. And I had a study group for a while for DevNet that I ran online, the RTP programmability meetup. And then I left Cisco to come to Red Hat, and I think WWT took over that group. So now I want to start this new group, but instead of everything automation, I really want to focus in on Ansible. So I feel that today there's so much going on with Ansible. There's a lot to talk about, and within the network domain, there's tons to talk about. So I really want to focus there. But if you have other interests in other IT domains, I think you'll still get value out of the meeting. Let me admit this person real quick, and I'll just keep doing that here in the beginning. If you just bear with me on that one. But this group's really for everybody. So if you're further along in Ansible, I think that you'll have value from seeing some of the topics that we're going to bring up, particularly around use cases and new capabilities of the Ansible automation platform. There's going to be a lot of cool things where perhaps in certain areas, if you're a subject matter expert and you'd like to speak at one of these meetups, just ping me and let me know, and I'm happy to add people to the schedule. And for the study group, and I'll talk about that in more detail here as we go through some of the slides, that's really meant for folks that are starting out in Ansible, and in particular in network automation using Ansible. So that one, we're going to look at different areas, different techniques over a period of time. And if you were to follow this through, you'll notice that we're covering like the syllabus of all of the main key points of the Ansible specialists for network automation. So this would be, a great study tool if you were to take that exam. But if you're studying for DevNet certifications as well, and I've done the associates and the professional, for DevNet, Cisco DevNet, a lot of what we're talking about would help you out greatly, in any of the Ansible sections for those tests, because you'll see a lot of different examples and have hands-on in that regard. So before we get too deep into this, I just wanted to introduce myself for those of you who don't know who I am. So who I am, I'm Tony Dubio, and I live in Wake Forest, North Carolina. And I've been at Red Hat for, I think, a year and 2 months now. And prior to that, I worked at Cisco, and way before that, I started out in the Air Force as a tech controller. So in that particular role, when I was much younger, and I don't want to date myself too much, but I'm pretty vintage compared to some of you folks. So back in those days, we had Cisco routers, and I was introduced to them in the Air Force. And when I got out, I had the opportunity to work on different networks, building networks, and over time, I had gained certain certifications like CCNA and MP and CCIE and route switch voice, and then later in data center. And those afforded me all sorts of opportunities to design and build network infrastructures. And over time, I really started to gain an appreciation for automation because, as we all know, manual configurations are pretty difficult to deal with at scale. So there's a lot of value in automation, but there's a lot of learning, to get started. So at Cisco, they were really a fan of Python. So early on, probably about 5 or 6 years ago, I really started to dig into Python. And obviously, because of Cisco, most of my focus was on network automation using Python, and as well as Python SDKs that Cisco would create for various products like DNA Center and SD-WAN, some of the more current stuff, and ACI and those types of things. I was able to really dig in and do some cool things, but for myself, it was okay, but working with customers and other folks that may not be as deep into Python as I was trying to be, and I was by no means an expert in Python, it was really hard, difficult to share a lot of the scripting. Or you would need a certain level of skill set with Python to even use a lot of the scripts that I was creating. So the barrier to entry was pretty high. So in addition to Python, we started to use a lot of Ansible and Terraform and some other tools like Postman and those types of things. And I really liked Ansible. So I gravitated towards Ansible, and I had an opportunity to come over to Red Hat and focus completely, exclusively on Ansible. So I could really, drill down and dig into and sink my teeth into the intricate details of Ansible. And, I really like what I'm doing now. So a part of this meetup group is not just for you guys. I want you to have, certainly have value, but it's also for me too, because I want to learn from what people are doing in the field, other folks that are more advanced than me are doing different things and that type of thing. As the saying goes, iron sharpens iron. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to learn, and that's what this meetup group is really about. So that's me, and I'm hoping some of you out there are kind of on the spectrum. Either starting out, some level of knowledge, and then experts in Ansible, so that there's opportunities to mentor folks. Feel free to speak up if we go into certain topics and use cases that are familiar to you, or something in particular that you're doing in your environment. If you're comfortable sharing that, or maybe redacting, some of the details or whatever, then feel free to bring up topics. I have everyone muted when you come on, but you should be able to unmute yourself. And then also feel free to add questions into the chat. If I miss them because I'm toggling between slides and demos and that sort of thing, I'll come back. And I will definitely answer every question afterwards if I miss anything. So back to the slide here. And again, I'm sorry, I just have to toggle back to let folks in. Here's what we're going to talk about. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry to interrupt. Yeah, I don't know if I'm able to accept people into the meeting, so just be advised.
Oh, okay, no worries. I think every time it pops up, I hear that noise. So from that perspective, I'll just toggle over and grab them. I don't know if there's a way for us, or at least the account that I have, for external folks just to come in without that. Do you know of that way?
Yeah, I think it's only for the meeting owner, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, so yeah, I'll look into that, but I might have to do this on these just in the beginning to let everybody in. But the good news, and we'll talk about the format of this meetup. We're going to record these, and the meetup group is really just like a landing page. So that way, over time, we can always kind of find our way back to the content. So what I intend on doing is, for each one of these topics, to record it, and to also create some additional details and links, like in the form of a blog, for like any reference materials and all that kind of stuff. So I'll make that available afterwards, and also the slides. So any slides that we have for any of these, I'll turn them into a PDF. So whatever links and so on and so forth, you'll have availability to them directly afterwards. And for the study group, I'm going to create a repository which I already created a repository. I just don't have much content in it. And that'll have various code that we'll use for hands-on labs. And I'll also create like a lab guide that'll probably be also included additionally into that blog, because it's easier for me to insert, like in WordPress, easier for like images and all that kind of stuff, as opposed to doing like README files and things like that. So I'll probably do that. So all of those things I'll make available after each session. So if you miss it, you can listen to the recording, but you also can just go and read the blog and click on links and all that kind of thing to catch back up. Or if you miss a bunch of them, you can kind of binge watch or binge lab, whatever the case may be, to catch back up to us, at any point in time as well. And I should also say too, like, I'm also speaking to people that are not here. So if you're watching this recording, then you're coming into this group into the future. So you'll need some of this background information for you to be able to kind of catch back up to us as well. So without further ado, we'll talk about the topics, or at least the proposed topics that I have listed out. But if you have any ideas yourself, just put them into the chat, or you can even go into the meetup group later if you think of something and add it into that chat. And if you feel like leading a session, then go ahead and volunteer. I'm happy to put you on a future event for that. So we'll also today, just in case anyone's completely new to Ansible, I'm going to do a very brief overview of Ansible. And it's not meant to really give you like, a view of the whole landscape or the automation platform, which is the product that we have for Ansible. None of that stuff. It's just really just a starting point. And then over time, we're going to build on that, and we'll double click into, just about everything Ansible with a focus always back, to the network automation, which brings us to the study group, which is, clearly that is focused on network automation. And again, how we'll work in labs and the environment. So to get started, I have an idea to use the Cisco sandboxes. So that way, if you don't have something available like GNS or EVE-NG or Cisco's modeling labs, you don't really have to, because you can just go there and create a free account. And I'll give you a topology file that you can use so that you have like the same configurations of routers and switches and endpoints. And you'll be able to run through the labs by just reserving time on one of the Cisco DevNet sandboxes. So we'll talk about that, and we'll be ready to come back and do some hands-on stuff when we meet again on February 24th, if you can attend that session. And again, that'll be recorded and all that good stuff too, if you're unable to meet it or make it. All right, so how the meetup is going to run. So today, I reserved like an hour on my calendar. In the future, depending on the topic and how much we're trying to cover on the study group, I'm going to cut the recordings in half. So that way, when you go back later and you want to replay the session, if you're only interested in the topic, you can watch that recording. Or if you're only interested in like whatever we covered in that particular study group, then you can watch that recording. So we'll always kick it off with the topic on the front end. So that way, if we invite a guest speaker, then they can do their thing. And if they want to drop off, then they can do that. And then we'll transition over to the study group. So the format for the first half, sometimes it'll be me sharing things that I think are interesting and cool about Ansible. But sometimes, again, it's a guest speaker. But what I'm going to ask them to do is to make it as interactive as possible, and include things like demos. And if they have, some sort of, sandbox environment for you guys to do a hands-on, those are the preferred format as opposed to just slides. So that's what we'll expect to see. Again, that could be between 30 and 45 minutes. So worst case, we'll have a 90-minute session, collectively, but sometimes it'll be shorter. It'll be 60 minutes. And we'll cut it off because we don't want to eat up, all the time or eat into the time of the study group. So the study group, again, that's for folks that are either interested in preparing for the Ansible Specialist in Network Automation, EX457, which is a certification that I took not too long ago. And I actually thought it was pretty good in terms of a hands-on type of certification. So I mentioned earlier In fact, like I'm a CCIE, so I have some experience with like that type of lab. So it's not like that. It's not crazy with all sorts of gotchas and scenarios where you really have to be very sharp and know all your different options. It's really focused on the automation part of it. So even the network piece, a lot of like the networking part of it, some of it's done for you, or it's curated in a way to where you don't have to be a network expert to be able to pass the certification. The focus is more around, how do you use Ansible to automate the network? So I thought it was pretty cool. But even if you're not targeting that particular certification, I think it's valuable in terms of just getting started with network automation. And it complements a lot of the other references that I'm going to share with you in this deck to help you move along and build those skill sets. And again, if I think I mentioned this earlier, if you're studying for like DevNet certifications, like the associates or professional, then a lot of what we're going over content-wise for the study group will help you, not for the entire DevNet because it includes Python stuff and NSO and other Cisco specifics, but for the certainly for the Ansible piece of it, it'll help you in that regard. And we'll use this sandbox. So again, I'll give you an overview of that here shortly. And in the beginning of the study group, we're going to use the Ansible core engine, which is the traditional CLI. So that way we can get an environment going up front that isn't too complicated for you, like installation wise. But we're going to take that same environment, and over time, we're going to add the controller, which used to be called Tower, but now it's the AAP, that's the Ansible Automation Platform. The controller is like what Tower used to be, but it does more now. So it's the current product. There's a way to use developer licenses for that in RHEL, and you'll be able to run one in your home lab environment and then connect it to the Cisco sandbox. So there's some moving parts there, so we don't want to worry, get caught in a ditch too early, like in that type of thing. So we'll kind of advance a bit, and you'll see a lot of demos using AAP controller on the front end. So you'll have some familiarity, and by the time we get to that point in the study group, it shouldn't be too hard for us to get it up and running. And for those of us that already have one, maybe we can help, team up with some of the folks that are getting started and just get everybody up to speed and on the same page to where we can start doing some of the controller stuff in the study group. So that's like a small part of the certification if you choose to go that route, but you do need to know, some things. So there is some cursory level of stuff that would be, recommended to have hands-on on that, prior to taking the test if you choose to do that later. So these are, the format. Now what we're going to talk about. So that's something that I started. I went ahead and took the liberty to add a couple of events, and I've posted them on LinkedIn and also in the Meetup group as well. So the first one that we have in this format is event-driven automation. So on February 24th, we're going to cover EDA. So that's something very new, and it's still in like a developer tech preview. So it's not something you can just turn on in the Ansible automation platform and the controller today, but that's something that is becoming a future general availability. So what we're looking at is we're in 2.3 right now. In version 2.4, they're looking to include that in like the May timeframe. But don't hold me to that because sometimes these things, the dates slip and that type of thing. But right now there is an EDA server, but you have to install it and you run it separately from the controller. So I'm going to demo what that looks like. So what does EDA mean? So for all intents and purposes, this is the ability of Ansible to respond to devices. So if a device has a particular event and communicates with Ansible through various sources, we can create automation around that. So it creates like a feedback loop, if you will. Oops, wrong tab. Yeah, so that way, as things happen in real time, you can act on them. So that doesn't necessarily mean that you auto remediate everything or make changes on the fly. It could just be notifications and the ability to see what's happening because you may not want to act on it. And then at the end of the day, it's at a minimum, it creates all sorts of opportunities to automate troubleshooting, to triage your troubleshooting. And I feel that that's really, really useful for network automation. So we'll drill into that one. I think that's a really cool topic. I've made what I think is some cool demos around networking and using EDA. And under the hood, you're going to learn Kafka, which is the publisher broker that we use underneath the hood. And you'll see how to install that in your environment if you want to play around with it. After that session, we'll reconvene and go over validated content. So this is something new where Ansible and our ecosystem, we're working to make our collections and modules, and you may not know too much about them yet, but we're going to use them a lot. So over time, you'll become very familiar with those. What we're doing is going beyond just examples, like simple examples, and now to the point where the examples are actually validated content that are more like validated designs that include like all the steps and what order you should go in to configure something, but in this case, to automate that configuration through workflows in Ansible. So you'll see a lot of value there because it'll save you time. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. You don't have to start from scratch. Even if you're a guru with playbooks, it's nice to have something that on the back end, the intent of what you're building has already been vetted out by a lot of these vendors that are a part of our ecosystem. So there's definitely value in the validated content, right? So value, validated value, if you will. And then in the third session, I have a guest speaker. So I wanted to, again, mix in some guest speakers. So Jason's going to join us, and he works on site, and he does a lot of hands-on Ansible stuff. So he wanted to just go over some of the things that he's been working on and some best practices. So the environment is around dynamic provisioning of DM/VPN tunnels, and he's just going to go through some of his lessons learned and best practices and some of the stuff that he's leveraged Ansible for to be able to provide that type of provisioning in his environment. So that's what we have. So for suggested future topics, I threw a couple things together, suggestions that I can kind of intermix with the feedback that's coming back from you guys. And what I have is Project Wisdom. So has anyone heard of ChatGPT? And you can use like emojis and stuff to kind of interact as well. I think your screen should look like mine, where you have some emojis, or you can show things that way. Get back to here, so you can just give me some thumbs up, or yeah, there you go. Appreciate it. Yeah, so with ChatGPT, you can today actually ask it to create a playbook for you. Now, whether or not it works, that's something that you'll have to double check. It's going to give you a pretty good starting point. Project Wisdom is something that we're working on to create these models around like best practices around the playbooks that kind of map back to like validated content. So instead of just giving you like some example that the AI finds on the internet somewhere, it's more like a vetted example. So Project Wisdom kind of builds on that same notion, and it'll become a part of the subscription for the Ansible Automation platform, and you'll be able to ask it to do things for you. So it's just another assistant type of thing that will be able to help you, especially if you're just getting started. It'll be like really easy for that barrier to entry, by using those types of tooling, to help you along, to assist you. So I thought that's a good one to go over. Another one is NetDevOps, NetOps, GitOps, all the buzzwords. I wanted to show you a demo of using Ansible Automation Platform with GitLab and creating an infrastructure where we can use and adopt, best practices from a DevOps perspective and how that looks, with Ansible. And at some point, I can offer you guys a hands-on workshop too. So this is different than the study group. The study group is very specific to the things that we need to do to prepare for the certification. The workshop does a lot of those same things, but it's something that's like curated and easy to access. It's like an enablement tool that Red Hat has, and I can schedule that, and you guys can have pods in that environment, and then one day we can go through the workshop. So that might be something that we kind of keep in our back pocket for later after we get a little bit deeper into the study group. And then, if you guys have any ideas, again, just put them into the chat room, and I'll grab them before we leave. And also on the meetup group. So I'll keep an eye on that, and I'll definitely, if you want to speak on the topic, include that as well. But if it's just a topic that you're interested in, either myself or I can find somebody in Red Hat or outside of Red Hat. And in some cases, I'll even go ping vendors too. I'll try to get some vendors that have complementary solutions and things that go along with Ansible, to have them join these sessions as well. So if you miss a session, I mentioned I'm going to record it. So if you go back to the meetup group, and what you'll notice is where it used to be in like a live event that you're accessing today, it'll change into a past event. So once it becomes a past event, then you'll have the opportunity to go back into it, and that's where you'll start to see links. So I'm going to aggregate, all the different, content that we're going to use: recordings, blogs, study labs, links to the repos for the code and all that. I'm going to have them in there, so that way you can go back in time, if you will, and then you can have access to all that stuff. So again, this is for the people in the future. If you're just joining us, 3 months from now, as well as you guys today that want to go back and rewatch anything, or if you want to go through the labs multiple times, you'll be able to have access to all that stuff. So if there's any questions, feel free to unmic yourself, or let me check out the chat and see what's going on over there. Okay, so we'll go ahead and switch gears here for a second. And this, again, my apologies to those who are already using Ansible. This is really just for us to all get on the same page, to level set, and just make sure that we all have a good understanding of what Ansible does. So at a high level, and again, this is Ansible. So Ansible also means, it means a couple of things. Ansible means, the open source community-driven Ansible, and it also means Ansible as a product. And the product is what we call the Ansible Automation platform. So regardless of how you're using it, really the value is the same. It's just on the product side of things, when I show some of those demos, you're going to see that it provides you with additional tools. So some of those tools are for roles-based access, for logging, for managing the automation to scale to like large environments, and to provide you with tools to make it easier to create content. When those situations exist, I'll make sure I draw a contrast. Like, this is the product, but for a lot of what we're doing in playbooks, you can get the same effect using just the Ansible command line. So we're kind of starting with that in the study group. So you'll see that most of this stuff is interchangeable. So from a simplicity perspective, and the reason why I kind of made that move from Python over to Ansible is because it's simple. So that didn't mean that I didn't really want to learn more about coding and becoming a developer. I knew I didn't want to become a developer. I'm a network guy at heart. But the challenge that I had was, no matter what I did and how much time I spent, I was having a heck of a time being able to share that code and to transfer it over to other folks that didn't necessarily care about Python. So simplicity became very important to me, because through Ansible, and because it's very human readable, and that's because everything that you're doing in Ansible, you're interacting with a YAML file. So a YAML file is very human readable, but it's also machine readable, because the playbook, that's what you're creating with YAML syntax. The playbook is really a machine readable definition file. So at the end of the day, all you're really doing is you're defining parameters. So what are these parameters? The parameters are a part of a module. So a module is something that you don't really touch directly. You just call on a module in your playbook. So behind the scenes, the majority of the modules that we talk about in network automation are developed in Python. So there's some Python code sitting there as part of a module. Now, where the module executes at runtime is different depending on the platform, or which platform you're using, and what type of devices you're connecting to. When you're connecting to network devices, that's running where Ansible's running. So you have Python running locally, and then you have an SSH connection or a REST API connection to the targeted device. If you're talking to like Windows or Linux servers, then you're running Python on them directly. So that's one difference in just the mechanics, of how Ansible works. But at the end of the day, all the hard stuff is really happening behind the scenes, and it's like a translation. So if I'm defining these parameters for a particular module, like say I'm building a router configuration like for an interface. So under the module, depending on what vendor it is, I'm going to call that particular module. I'm going to set, an interface configuration. So it's going to be in like a key value format. And we'll talk more about what that is. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, you'll definitely know as we go into these sessions. I'm just defining them there, but at runtime, there's some Python code that's running, and what it's doing is it's converting that into serialized data that's connecting to those devices. And that data could either be like the native command line, so the actual command lines that we would use on those boxes if we were to like telnet in or SSH into them rather, and make a configuration change, or it could be the REST API calls. Some devices have REST comp that, that's like a REST API, or it's like a controller like ACI or Arista. We talk through REST APIs to most of the SDNs. All of that is being converted for us on the back end, and that's the code that the vendors create for us. Now, it could be like individual contributors that are creating some of these modules, or you can create your own custom modules if you want to in Python, or in PowerShell if you're building like something for Windows. But it's simple because once you do that, all the people need to understand is really the YAML, the playbook part of it. And even that can be abstracted. So the platform gives you self-service so that these playbooks can sit behind like a self-service window that we call a survey. Let me just edit this person. So it's very easy. So it's simple, simple, simple. I don't want to beat that horse to death. But it's still powerful because you still have the Python behind the scenes or the PowerShell. So all the things, all the constructs that you would have used directly that are more difficult, that's still there in Ansible. And then on top of that, you have a platform that you can move to that can create orchestration through workflows and provide notifications. There's also all sorts of other cool things that are very important to running something in production and more importantly at scale. So very powerful. Now, it's agentless, so we don't have to deal with trying to figure out how to install agents on whatever the domain is that we're automating. And as we all know in the network, not many devices allow us to install an agent. So most of the firewalls and routers and switches and those types of things do not provide that capability. So we have like a push model to where we can, have a connection and then create automation in a push model. So sometimes Ansible gets beat up a little bit because it's like, hey, well, what about a feedback loop? Because, the push model, that alludes to you need to have a scheduler, go out and check these things periodically and then act on that if something changes. In Ansible, I mentioned we have event-driven automation. So that's where that new feedback loop is coming from. And you'll be able to use streaming telemetry and EEM and other mechanisms that are in place in these devices to create these events, and then they can talk back to Ansible. So again, that's going to be really cool, and we'll talk a lot more about that in the next session. Oh, here I kind of got ahead. I got the cart ahead of the horse here because this is a depiction of what I was talking about with the network devices. Then we're running Ansible and Python, the modules executed at runtime locally. And then we're connecting to the devices over SSH or REST APIs. And then with the Linux or Windows, it's running there. So you have better performance for things, like for operating system types of things. So here's where we kind of arrive at a point where there's a lot going on. And these numbers are not correct. They continue to change all the time. But what this is the ecosystem. So there's an ecosystem that's participating in open source. So if you go to Galaxy, you can go there and you can have the ability to pull down collections that include modules from various vendors on the community site. But we also have certified collections, and that's what this is talking about. So the difference here is that vendors that go through the process to become certified, they have to vet out any updates to their collections. So they go through rigor in testing. And then they also have requirements around the documentation and other aspects of like including dependencies like Python modules and all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of checkboxes that they go through. And if for some reason those modules and those collections don't work, that's a part of the product where Red Hat becomes like that single throat to choke. So you can open up a ticket and they'll work out issues with modules that are not working properly. Sometimes it's a regression testing thing as a new release of Cisco iOS goes out, but something's not right with the module and it breaks. Those types of things can be triaged through Red Hat as opposed to going to the GitHub repository and logging an issue with the contributors, and that usually has a longer turnaround time. So not to say that the community is not going to help you, but it's just not as quick and escalate it, right, as it would be if you have the certified collections. And that's a part of the platform and all that good stuff. So this is new, and I talked about it earlier, the validated content. What we're going to key in on is there is some new validated content around networking. So on March 17th, we'll go into that, and we'll be able to build some networking constructs based off of best practices for BGP and other aspects of networking. And it's really easy to use. So just think of this as playbooks and roles that we'll talk about that have been even further curated. So it's like if you were building, let's say like an EVPN VXLAN, and if like Cisco created validated content for that, which most of the vendors like are in process of doing something like that now, you'd be able to grab it, and you're going to have like your own one-offs and things like that and nuances in your configuration, but maybe like 70 to 80% of it is the stuff that you would have to configure normally in the order that you would go in. So it's going to give you like a great start without having to figure out like every playbook that you need to build. So this is going to help accelerate a lot of automation, because a lot of it's going to come out from our ecosystem partners and from Red Hat as well. So like most of the generic things that are like more multi-vendor-ish in nature, we're focused more on that. And then the vendors are focused more on their stuff. You know, how to make it better to automate DNA Center with Ansible, or SD-WAN or ACI, or, you know, any of those types of things. Or who I know Arista has validated content that they've been working on too for their SDN platform. So you'll see more and more of that stuff. And then that's where it becomes a lot easier to digest, because we don't have to think through all the stuff, or we don't need as much as consulting and that kind of stuff. So in terms of the study group, so if you click on this link, it takes you to the EX457 page. And I'm going to give you a PDF with all these links, so don't worry about screenshots and all that kind of stuff. And what you'll see is we're going to cover like the objectives from a studying perspective. So this is just like any certification. It's not like screenshots of anything in particular or something that I did like studying and all that kind of stuff. It's going to be like just covering, you know, skill sets. So there's other free study material that I collected for you that you can go through as well, along, you know, that will complement what we're doing when we get into the study group portion of this. And all that will help you prepare. And again, if you're not even interested in that certification, this is all good stuff. If you're just really interested in network automation, going through, you know, a cycle of this is really going to help you out. Or at least these are things that I think that everybody should know in terms of network automation. So that's what that is. Oops. And again, if you're doing DevNet certs, it'll be helpful for that as well. So here's the objectives. So obviously it's going to take some time. It's going to take some time, you know, to cover these, to do them justice. So having said that, I'm going to create, you know, kind of the topics that I think we're going to cover, and I'll add them into the event dates. So every 2 weeks, I'm hoping, you know, that's my goal, is to have these every 2 weeks. And then we'll try to, you know, work on what we can do in like 30 to 45 minutes. So if we don't cover everything, then it may bleed over to the next session. So then I'll kind of, you know, modify that on the blog to kind of give us an idea of like where we got to in that video. But over time, and as long as it takes, we're just going to go through all of these. So you may have a goal to do it a little bit quicker, right? So we're doing our thing, but if you want like the official study material, there's you know, instructor-led training directly from Red Hat and from Red Hat partners that you can attend, and that course is called DO457. And there's also like you know, like an online version of that, but they're both kind of expensive, right? So depending on what your situation is, if you're like a self-learner and your company's not paying for it, then this is probably not feasible. If your company is a Red Hat customer, and if you bought Ansible or thinking of buying Ansible and that type of thing, you may have some credits to use towards this type of training. So this is a course that you'd want to talk to like that account team and see if you have anything in that regard. But if not, and if you need to do this kind of on the cheap and you want to go a little bit faster, there's some CBT nuggets that covers like all these same topics. But just keep in mind that they don't give you a lab. So this course gives you a lab environment that you can go back and you can bring it up And I think you can keep it for like a couple of weeks at a time, so all your configs are still in there. And if not, you can save some things back out and that type of thing. But you have a lab environment. So we're creating our own lab environment that's similar, but not the same as this. But we'll be able to go back in and do a lot of stuff. But this one doesn't have the lab environment, but I think they do provide you with guidance on creating something like on GNS or one of those other tools. But I'm sure you can take the IP addresses and change it to make it work in the Cisco free one. So the free sandbox that we're going to talk about, you can reserve it for 4 hours. So if you're studying for more than 4 hours a day, God bless you, you can reserve like another session afterwards. But I'll show you different ways of getting your configs out of it and saving them, so that way you can go back the next session, keep building on that. So this one right here, this link, this is all like the same material that we're covering, and it's free and it's online. It's just in the docs. So you can go in here and there's quite a bit on network automation. This will cover like a lot of what you need to know. So as you have time, you may want to read through some of those. And then here's an ebook that has some good information as well. So you can download that from here. I won't go into it because I think it's going to ask me to like put my name and email and all that kind of stuff. But that's another good one. And then there's self-paced labs. So these are really cool. So here, and again, you'll have these links after the session. There's all sorts of labs where you can spin these up and go through curated labs. So there's a lot of networking stuff in here. And there's also a lot of the automation platform. So if you want more familiarity with what the controller, which used to be the tower, you can go through these labs. And these are all free. And you don't have like full connectivity to everything outside of them, but they do give you a lot of liberty to make changes and things like that. But once it goes away, and you're not going to be able to save anything that you created inside of it. But you can copy things out of the VS Code, which is like the IDE, web-based IDE that they use. So you can grab some stuff in that regard. So the last thing here is a repo. And there's nothing in here right now, but there will be. So I'm going to start adding to this. So for the next session, you're going to see some lab material and things of that nature as part of this repo. And the README will start to have more information in it. And there also will be a blog to keep like some of the lab guides and things like that. So again, if you don't have this PDF later, it's always going to be a way back to it in the meetup group. So multiple ways of getting to the same stuff. And then, those breadcrumbs will be available for anyone that's joining this later. So thanks for joining us, 2 weeks from now or whatever. You can go back and catch back up to us in that regard. So here is DevNet. So through emojis or whatever, has anyone used DevNet sandboxes before? Let me get back here so I can see. Okay, so it looks like some of you, but some haven't. So let's look at that real quick. So if I go here, I have an account, but if you don't, you can sign up for free. And I think it gives you a couple of options, like if you want to use Google or whatever to sign in. So once you log into this thing, and I'm going to use my Cisco CCO. Okay, so I log into it. They kind of changed the layout of the landing page. So what you want is down at the bottom, find the sandbox right here. And then once you're in the sandbox, click on the sandbox catalog. And what we're looking for is the Cisco Modeling Labs. This one right here. So what this is it's like a nested virtualization type of study tool, right? So if you're familiar with like GNSs or ENGs, or whatever you're using that's similar to that. It's just another one of those tools. So all of these are devices that are a part of the stock topology that comes up when you use this thing. So you'll have access to it, and all these IPs will be the same every time. So if I create a lab guide, I'm just going to use these IPs because we expect them to be in that environment, and you'll be able to go in there and use it. So when you reserve it, though, you'll notice it says 2 hours. But if you click on the pen and then hours, you can actually reserve it for 4 hours. Now I'm going to go ahead and see right now and kick it off, but it may not work because this week is Cisco Live EMEA. So they're over there on a different time zone, but I noticed that every day they've been reserving like all the capacity because they have that DevNet zone and all these people coming through to do labs. So it may not allow me, but I just want to kick it off so you have some idea of what it looks like. So it gives you a status over here, and then normally it just takes about 10 minutes or so. And what'll happen is it'll email you. When it emails you, it's going to give you credentials for a VPN. So this tab here, and I also have it in our slide deck, you can download the AnyConnect VPN client and use that. If you're on Linux, I have like the Open VPN one, and that works fine as long as it does. You can use IPsec VPN. You can log into it. You just include like the port that they provide you in the email, and also obviously the username and password, and then you can connect to it. So that happens, after it's finished, you'll receive that email, and then you'll be able to connect into it. Once you're connected to it through the VPN, then you can access those devices. So how we want to access them is kind of preferred. So here's what it's going to look like. This topology, I'm going to provide you with the file. So this Ansible4Networking.yaml file is already in that repo. What you do is once you connect into this, and I'll go through this on the next session because I'll have to, right, to be able to get into it to start off the studying portion, is I'm going to connect into it, and I'm going to upload my topology into it, and it's going to look like this. So this is the one that we're going to use over and over again, but these devices are going to use the same IP addresses that we saw previously. So none of that's going to change, but we'll be able to connect to it through the VPN on that 10.10 subnet that we saw. So what's going to happen is like they provide you with a jump box that you can run Ansible off of, but anything you build into that is really only available while you have that session. So that would mean you need to copy those files off every time and that type of thing. So what I encourage us to do is to install a VM on your laptop, and then you can use that VPN connection to connect your VM that's running Linux, and then to do it from there, because that way you can keep all your configurations. And then when we get further into the study group and we install the Ansible Automation Platform Controller, you run that from that VM, and then it can go through the VPN tunnel and traverse the tunnel and connect to those devices. So that way you can run the platform and connect to those devices, because we can't hit them directly over the internet. We have to go through the VPN tunnel. If you have some other sort of like VM that you're running outside of your laptop, as long as you can get the VPN client on there and co-locate it, then you can do it that way as well. I've done that before where I have a server and I'll bring up a VPN to whatever, and then I can run VMs off of that as well. Another thing you can do is if you don't want to deal with DevNet, no worries. You can go ahead and if you have your own CML, there's a personal edition. You can run up to 20 devices in that. You can take, from that, you have the option, the ability to use my topology file in your own CML. So some of you may have that. This used to be called Viral, and now it's called CML. If you have GNS or EVE-NG, you can bring one of those up, and then what I'll do is I'll take the router configurations, like the base configurations before we build stuff, and you can take those and you can use the same IPs and all that stuff in your own environment. So you can kind of repurpose it, refactor it into your own thing, and that'll work as well. Is anybody out there using GNS3 or EVE-NG? If you could do the thumbs up for that one, just to see if anyone has that option. Okay, so it looks like most of you will use, or if you want to do the hands-on, you have the option to use the sandboxes. And again, we're going to go into that in more detail. And I'll create some steps on the blog afterwards as well. And you should be able to learn how to connect to it and to get the VPN part working. So that's sort of like the homework that I'm alluding to here is go back to the meetup group, and I'm going to have this slide deck available for you, and then go through these links to get your VPN going. And then once you have your VPN, reserve a sandbox just to become familiar with it. And this is for you working from your laptop. So what I recommend is to have Ansible running locally, right? So you're not going to be able to install the AAP later, directly on your laptop. You have to run it on RHEL. So what this is are some links for getting a developer's license, so a free license to use RHEL. And this explanation shows you how to run it on VirtualBox. So you can implement, install VirtualBox on Windows, Mac, Linux, whatever, and then bring up a RHEL VM, and then you can use a developer license, so that way you can, pull down DNF, pull down your Yum, your updates and those types of things, and you'll have no problems there. And then later, you will also use a developer license for the Ansible automation platform. So that'll allow you to run it, but in like a reduced capacity. You can only have, I think it's like 10 devices or something like that, but that'll be plenty for what we're doing. And you'll be able to do that. So once you have your VM, then this is just a link, pretty basic on how to set up Ansible Core Engine, just a CLI. And then later, we don't want to rack our brains yet, and build AAP from, the next session. So we're going to give ourselves a break in that regard, and we're going to come back to it further into the sessions, and we're going to take that same Linux VM that you're using, and then we're going to build AAP on it. So if you're having problems here, then we'll try our best to help you through it, unless there's something insurmountable on like whatever you're using, for operating system or whatever. But for the most part, if you get it to run, you need 8 gigs of RAM later for the AAP. You can get away with much less just running the command line, but you want at least 40 gigs of storage so you have enough space to install the AAP controller later, because it does need room for, to install it, plus the logs and the jobs and other things that it has to store locally. So you definitely want to give it at least that. And if all else fails, you can use that jump box, but you're not going to be able to install AAP on it because it's like I think it's an Ubuntu jump box. But like if you want to just like get started through the command line and you don't want to do all this stuff, then you can get a sandbox and you can use their jump box as a alternative, right? But at some point, it's gonna, you're not going to be able to get past that until you have your own RHEL. So that, I think, is everything that I wanted to cover. But before we stop recording, and we've got a few minutes here, does anyone have any questions or just anything that you want to talk to before we drop off this?
I think getting into the logging aspects of, for future ideas, you were looking for future ideas. I think getting into some of the logging aspects of Ansible could be really cool. For instance, I could create a simple playbook that does something, but getting the actual feedback as to what was successful, what was not, and then be able to drill down further if I need to troubleshoot.
Okay. Yeah, great suggestion. And again, if you guys think of something later, just feel free to pop it into the meetup group chat, or in the next session in the chat room, and I'll go through these every time and make sure I didn't miss anything that you guys added. But thank you for joining on a Friday. I know everyone's busy, getting ready for the weekend. I don't want to stand in between you and anything fun. So I hope you have a great weekend. And these will always be recorded, so it's no worries if you can't attend them. But I really appreciate you attending them, and I'm looking forward to interacting more and just stuff that we can work through together. And as we work together, we're going to learn from each other, so it's going to be really good. So I'm going to go ahead and stop this.